So I will be talking today about international schools. They're kind of my personal perception about what I've learned and discovered when liaising with within the sector. So I'm just going to first of all give you a bit of context about us, so you know where I'm which direction I'm coming from. So IPSEF is a business-to-business conference that addresses the business elements of the international schools market. So it draws together schools, owners, heads, bursars, people like that, to engage with other stakeholders. So these might be architects, investors, suppliers such as yourself, and also the regulators. So the regulators will be licensing, inspecting, in some cases fee setting of these schools. So it's a very important networking opportunity. We started in London, which was really about raising the awareness of opportunities for the UK independent sector overseas, but we now run it in Asia and the Middle East. In the early days, we worked closely with Department for International Trade, UCTI as it was called then, and we still do. And I'll talk about an initiative that we're running with DIT in Kuala Lumpur in March. So what is an international school? Well, there's no sort of global definition, there's no consensus about what is an international school. But it will be something to do with the curriculum, it will be something to do with the student cohort or the medium of instruction. And I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail. I'm also going to talk about the different models of schools. Private schools range in all sorts of different structures and formats, and that will have perhaps a bearing when you're marketing to the schools, their ethos, their culture, where they're coming from. I'll also talk about some of the market data, so how many schools there are, the number of schools that are projected, where these main groups of schools are, and also then towards the end help you perhaps or point you in the direction of a strategy that you might want to introduce within your company when you're marketing to these schools. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about the IPSEF journey, because we are a small company, an SME. We were exporting for the first time. We, like you, wanted to market and needed to market to international schools. So that may be relevant to you as well. So, what is an international school? Well, the medium of instruction could give it a definition. It might be English medium instruction in Japan. It might be a Chinese medium instruction in Singapore or something like that. So that will give you a good hint as to what is an international school, but also the curriculum. The British curriculum, Australian, American, IB, there's a whole range of these curriculum, and you'll want to look into the school to find out exactly what curriculum it is that they teach. But also think about the cohort. Okay, so for example, the regulations vary all around the world as to which or who can attend an international school. So in China, for example, local Chinese cannot attend an international school, but they can if they have a foreign passport. So there are ways around the rules, because they might acquire a foreign passport from a third party, and that will give them access to an international school. In Singapore, locals cannot go to an international school. In Dubai, it's a completely free market. Lots of the locals go to the private sector. The local expat children can't go to a local school. So each country has a different dynamic. And in Malaysia, for example, there was a cap on the number of local people who could go to a school. And it was, I think, 30%, and then it was raised to 40%, and there isn't one now. So that really has acted as a catalyst, as far as the government is concerned, to raise standards in the local schools, so there's more competition. But also that means more students coming to the international schools. And I've got a statistic here just to let you know what's going on in Malaysia. There are 171 international schools teaching about 72,000 students. And in KL there are 37 international schools. And next door in Singapore, there are 110 international schools teaching about 64,000 students. Then there are what we call British schools. Well, of course, there's lots of British schools all over the world, aren't there? But there are British schools and there are British schools. You may be very familiar with the expansion of some of the UK's independent sector overseas. Harrow, Dulwich, Haileybury, Wellington and schools like that. But that's not the only type of British school overseas. In many cities around the world there is a British school of X. But they're not in any way regulated by the UK. The DEFE has no control, has no desire to have any control or say in their operation. And some years ago, some of the governments overseas and parents were coming to the DFE and saying, well, this British school in X, how British is it? And they were saying, well, we don't know anything about it. It's nothing to do with us. We don't regulate. We don't inspect them or anything. So what the UK government has done a few years ago, they've created an inspection regime which is entirely voluntary for British schools overseas. So they can apply to one of about 6 accredited organisations, accredited by the DFE, who can go out to a British school overseas and inspect it. And those results are published and they have to be re-inspected. So that's what I mean by British schools and non-British schools, but they might use the same label. Having said there was no global definition, here are 2 definitions used by ISC research. I don't know if anybody from ISC is here. Is Diane here? No? Okay, well, ISC research, if you don't know, has an awful lot of data on the international schools market. Where they are, who owns them, what are the fees, how many students, what is the curriculum. So if you have a very specific project, it's worth talking to ISC research. They're presenting. Good. Okay. So look on the diary and then you could meet them tomorrow. So ISC have got 2 particular definitions. So when I quote ISC figures, these are the definitions. These are the schools that they include in their surveys and research will comply with one of those 2 criteria. Different models. Now this will have an impact on their procurement and their culture and their ethos, okay? So what I call, I said it's a personal thing, this talk, it's a legacy school. So all around the world there were British schools, very small, often after the war, in the colonial days, for the expats, for the embassy people, for the oil workers and so on. Some of those are very long established. The one I'm thinking about in KL is over 70 years old. They celebrated their 70th anniversary. So these schools, family owned, not necessarily for profit, but when it comes to retirement, they suddenly realize they've got a huge asset on their hands. They're perhaps in a prestigious part of the city, land is worth a fortune, and an individual really can't afford to buy them. So these are now often being bought by local private groups or commercial companies. But there are still a lot of these legacy schools. Some of them have converted, like the one I'm thinking about in KL, the Alice Smith School, to be parent-owned. So they have a profit, but it's not for distribution. So that's an interesting concept. Private local schools, I think that needs too much explanation. There are just private schools like in the UK which have owners. However, more than in the case in the UK, there are some of these private groups have quite a number of schools. So there are local individual private schools and there are local private chains. So just for as an example, in Dubai, where we visit once a year, there's Talim, and then in Malaysia, there's the ones I'm familiar with include Nexus, and Nexus certainly one of them, and corporates. The commercial world is now getting interested in education for profit. One of the industries that kind of complements the education sector in the commercial world is commercial real estate. So you have land, you have a building, and you have leases, in which case, in terms of education, fees coming in. So they quite like looking at the education sector as an investment to diversify their portfolio. So that's another player in the market. And again, they will have a different culture in those schools than the other 2 possibly. High net worth individuals. I know people who come to IPSEF and they manage the funds of high net worth individuals who are perhaps looking to broaden their investments. Perhaps they want to be in something that's doing good, so they're looking at education. Private equity, there are a number of private equity firms, certainly in the UK, which have an interest and portfolio in education, not just in terms of schools, but products or in colleges, further sixth form colleges and so on. Franchise schools, this tends to be the model used by the UK schools that are opening campuses overseas. They will work with an investor and they will franchise their name. You're familiar with franchising? Well, it applies in education. There's a lot at stake, and one of the things we do at IPSEF is really bring investors and schools together. So if you're a school of several hundred years old, you're not going to give your name to anyone, you know. So we get a lot of lawyers involved as well, protecting the brands and the copyright and the IP. And often these schools will be responsible and monitor the educational output. Okay, so they might have a say in who the head is, they might select the head, the curriculum they'll have a say in. So their brand, their quality, their ethos is instilled in these new schools overseas. I've also got here at the bottom low-fee schools. This is a facet of the market, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, India and parts of Asia. So if your product works at low margin but high volume, it's worth looking out for low-fee schools. So these are very popular where either the government education is very poor or possibly non-existent, but people obviously want to educate their children. So in many countries they're prepared to invest, you know, a couple of dollars or something like that a day or a week or whatever it costs, and the businesses behind them make the margins on a low margin but on the high turnover. There are also philanthropic schools. So often people from developing countries who've, you know, made their billions in telecoms or shipping or whatever it is, very often endow and have a chain of schools. Again, so they will have a different ethos and culture. So the reason I'm explaining about this is that when you come to market, you need to sort of know much more than you need to know more about the school and its culture and its buying processes than perhaps just the name above the door. Okay, these will all have an influence on how you might want to market. So in return now to some of the data from ISC. So I don't know how clear that is from the back, but I won't repeat it. But basically here, these are the top 10 countries of international schools, and you'll see the UAE is there up at the top, with China, Pakistan and India running in second, third and fourth place. It's not that it's a race. You'll see Saudi Arabia. If you add that to the UAE number, you can see there's a considerable quantity in the Middle East and then in Asia as well. So here we go. This is by enrollment. So UAE streets ahead of the others. Add in the neighbouring Saudi Arabia and Qatar as well. You know, you can get a feel for where the biggest markets are. The interesting one for many people is the number in Spain. I don't know if anybody from the embassy in Spain here can explain that, but it might just be that there's a lot of expats there, lots of people living there, but also Spain, there's a very great encouragement to have bilingual schools. So that would probably explain that fact. By city, that sort of complements the earlier ones really, but Dubai and Madrid, there you go. And then they sort of plateau off at the other cities like Shanghai there and Beijing, so 250 between them. So a significant number in China, and that's growing. And if you remember that those, unless you can get around the rules by your strange passport, those are all expats, not local children. In Dubai, I think I said, you know, all of the schools but are virtually private and international schools. There are very few schools for locals. So it's very much a hub there. And then curriculum, that will infect, you know, your products possibly. Maybe your products only suit one type of curriculum, one type of language. So again, this is the sort of data ISC delve into. So you can see that amongst the schools that they have on their books, the UK remains a preferred curriculum provider. And of course there are French and German and Australian schools and Japanese schools and so on. So don't forget that. Come on. Okay, so this is the big picture. You know, where's the market going? If you compare to the number of schools in 2000, just over 2,500, to where we are now, and where it might be in about 10 years' time, you can see that if you're thinking about this as a market, then it's certainly a growing market, okay? And doing your homework, which I'll come on to later, can certainly reap benefits. And I'll come on to the difficulties and the importance of setting a proper strategy presently. So this is just a graph here showing you the student enrollment, historical, current, and projected. So from under 1 million in 2000 to over 10 million 26 years later, and now 4 times as many in 6 years. So significant projections for the number of students. Okay, so developing a strategy. What I want to talk about here is the sort of things that you need to think about. I used to work in export promotion for a UK association and helping companies develop their businesses overseas. And my first advice is that always get commitment for an export plan from the top. Otherwise, you don't get the buy-in from the very top. You don't get the budget, you don't get the allocation, the ring fencing of time and money. It probably won't work. If you're the boss and you're sitting here, great. If you're not the boss and you've been asked to research this market, tell them that's a really important thing. I was speaking to one of the stand holders earlier on today, and he said, oh, I'd love to come to your event, Mark, but you know, it was really handled as sales by people in the UK team, but we've now got some investment, and it is now part of our strategy to have an international team. That is the sort of way to do it. If you're in a really small business, then that's great because it's probably you. But if you're in a bigger business, get that backing from the top. Do the research. You know, talk to people like ISC Research. Come to IPSEF, learn about the market. Liaise with DIT, Department of International Trade. You know, they have run missions, or through associations and chambers of commerce and so on, they run trade missions. Not necessarily an educational one, but there might be a general trade mission out to Karachi or Nairobi or somewhere like that. Maybe that's where you think there's a market for you. Doesn't matter if it's not an education trade mission, they will still support you. And as you can see in the area behind us here, all the commercial officers from various countries around the world. So if you don't know about that, go to the registration desk and ask if there's any appointments left for any of these education sector leads from embassies and the High Commission. Be realistic in terms of your budget and time. Export is time consuming. Okay, you can't just do it from your desk. You do need to go and visit people. You do need to conduct research. You know, and if you go a professional outfit, that's going to cost you money. Think about how you will distribute. Are you going to sell direct? Are you going to sell online? Are you going to appoint a distributor or an agent? The commercial officers might be able to help you find distributors and agents. Are you going to do it yourself? Are you going to go to Bett Asia? Are you going to go to IPSEF and meet people? Are you going to go to one of the many local shows? Lots of the international school associations peppered all around the world. They all have conferences and exhibitions. You know, you could spend your life doing these things, but really do your research to determine which are the events and what's the right way and your route to market. Are there different things? You know, you are all individual companies. You all have your expertise. You all have your own networks. Is there some alliance that you could strike up with a complementary company? I've been on trade missions, led trade missions, an educational trade mission, for example. There's been competitors in it. But when it comes to export, they're kind of freer to look at doing things differently because they don't feel that threat of competition. Or to both companies, it's a new market and there are opportunities by bringing products together and coming to arrangements. So there's lots of different ways of doing it. So have a think about that. And again, as I was sort of alluding to earlier when I make my initial remarks, there are lots of different types of schools. You know, do you feel more comfortable working with a corporate that maybe has 15 schools? Or would you prefer to deal with the legacy schools? Is your culture going one-to-one? Can your products serve different curricula? Or are you fixed to the UK curriculum? If it's a technology product, which I imagine most of you coming from that kind of background today, probably, you know, how are you going to update? How are you going to do training when you have new products? Are you going to go out there? Are you going to find somebody locally? Might you have a customer, an old customer from the UK who's gone to work in Dubai? Might they be interested in doing things with you at weekends or in the evening? Do you want to poach them? You know, think about that. Those are the sort of things you will have to face. And of course, follow up. Always essential, whether you're in the UK or whether you're marketing overseas, is follow up those leads. Particularly in exports, it's important. People need to know you're serious. It's very easy to just turn up at a huge show in Hong Kong or Dubai or something like that. And they say, oh, that's really good. But until they know that you're serious about it, so until they know or they've seen you come back 6 months later on a trade mission, or you're at the show the same time the next year, then they say, okay, this person's serious, particularly if you've been doing your follow-up. So never something to be underestimated. And this phrase at the bottom, the influence. You know, in the International Schools Project, they are big schools being built. Okay, so if Harrow or Dulwich or anybody else is setting up a new school, they'll probably employ a project management company. So maybe some of your products, for some of you, it might be suitable, rather than flogging around the world selling to individual schools, try to find out who is the project manager. You know, contact Nord Anglia or Cognita or something, saying, you know, who is responsible for your procurement? Do you have an in-house project manager? Have you got a new school coming? These are the sort of questions you can ask when you see people face to face. If you're at a conference like Bett or IPSEF or something, ask these people, do your research. Find the smart ways to get your name known and into the schools. So I said at the beginning that I was going to talk to you a little bit about how we worked with Department for International Trade, or whatever it was called at the time. And we, like you, are a small company. We thought there was a gap in the market for running an event overseas. We'd run a small IPSEF in London. And our gut feel was the Middle East and Southeast Asia. You've seen the statistics, and that's where many of the UK schools were already setting up. So for various reasons which I won't go into, we thought, let's start in Malaysia. So we needed evidence that our gut feeling was right. Malaysia ticked all sorts of boxes, very strong UK educational links, still happening now. The year of education in Malaysia, UK education, is taking place now. It's always been promoting itself as a regional hub for education. It has an Indian community, a Chinese community, the local Bahasa Melayu population, as well as an extensive expat population. So the kind of ingredients kind of seem to work for the sort of event that we were thinking about. And also they had thought about their international school strategy. The government had a policy, it had a framework about the sort of schools that it wanted, where they would be, how many they wanted, what was the regulatory framework. And that's encouraging for an investor, and it's encouraging for a school thinking of setting up overseas. They know what they're in for. Some countries don't, which could be viewed as being great because there are no rules here. That's fine. Well, let's get stuck in. But on the other hand, if there are no rules and there is a rule introduced subsequently, you know, you're vulnerable. So Malaysia, Dubai both have that framework. So what we did, we contacted SIVA, who is the lead education officer at the High Commission in Kuala Lumpur, and we commissioned what in their jargon is called an OMIS, which is a market research effectively. And we said, and you can do exactly the same, we said we wanted to know who was in charge of private education in the ministry. We wanted to meet some heads of some of the schools. We wanted to meet some of the sort of Quango type organizations in education. And SIVA produced a market visit program for us. And my business partner, Rona, is Rona here? No? Okay. And she went out and had about a week visiting people, often in the company of SIVA from the High Commission, which really adds weight to you, gives you a little bit of presence and a bit of confidence in the people you're seeing, that you're with somebody from the embassy. Consequently, cutting a long story short, we went ahead with it. We searched venues, and Rona put together a program, and we launched in 2012, and we've run that every year since. engagement with UKTI has been very close. In the early days, the High Commissioner opened our first one with the Minister of Education, and we're now doing an initiative which I'll come on to presently. But we've sort of found our feet in Malaysia, but we're still very close to Siva and Fiona and the team there. And I would suggest that, you know, if you are exploring any market, that's a really good place to start. The other thing that Siva did for us was helped us by providing some contacts with local partners, people who we might work with, you know, to do the sort of the badging and the chivying and some local invoicing and, you know, that sort of thing. And they found a company called Mint Communications, perfect fit for us. Not on the first look, because they run educational events. We don't want to get into bed with them, do we? But actually, they market to the parents. We're not marketing to the consumer, we're marketing to the heads, the owners, okay? So it was a very good fit. They knew all the schools, but they were talking to different people in the school, so that was great. So Mint have been helping us from not quite 2012, but shortly afterwards. So a little bit about IPSEF. It takes place in Dubai and Malaysia. It's very engaging, it's very dynamic, panel discussions. The gentleman on the top left, he heads up the KHDA, which is a body you need to know. Knowledge and Human Knowledge and Human Development Authority in Dubai. They're responsible for all the private schools in Dubai. Okay, there isn't a regulatory body that has more experience than the KHDA. They have to have a really robust, thorough, transparent system, because if they didn't, nobody would set up a school and their economy would collapse. And the KHDA is very transparent. You can speak to people, very easy to get to meetings, very open website, lots of statistics. So if you think you want to know more about Dubai, that's the place to start, okay? Lots of question and answers, panel discussions. But more than anything else, really what people get from is the networking. It's high level. So you have investors from private, you have the school owners, you have the suppliers, the regulators. And the idea is that you will leave with a pocket full of contacts that you can follow up with. That's the Deputy High Commissioner speaking last year in Malaysia. And the other thing I haven't mentioned, we do school visits on the third day. Really valuable, particularly for investors. You know, they might not have been into a school for a long time. You know, it's all money and spreadsheets for them. Actually, go into a school. And this one here, the GEMS Nation Academy, we visited this at IPSEF in Dubai in September. It had opened about 3 weeks earlier. Extraordinary, huge. It's one of their most expensive schools. The GEMS school, you probably know GEMS. GEMS is a Dubai-based private education company. Schools like this, they're also active in the low-cost, low-fees schools market. So they do the whole range. The company to look up, most certainly. So we had a brilliant tour there. And so that's great. And also the schools, you know, they might fly in from Qatar or Singapore or something, and to actually go and see another school. And the schools we visit tend to be new schools. They might have a new campus. They might have a new secondary or something different to them. I'm not going to go through those. I think I've said enough about IPSEF. So that's all I wanted to say. It's a bit of a race through the market. I hope it's given you just something. If you go away with one or two things that you think, oh, that was interesting, then I'll be pleased and I'll know that I haven't wasted your time.